Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tina Edwards, but more importantly, I am with Owen Jones. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. How you doing?
Good, yes, I'm well.
Looking very summery.
Why, thank you very much. So are you. Working the bright colours. This is a good ensemble. I like it. So you describe yourself as a campaigner before you do a journalist. When you heard about the No More Page 3 movement, which part of you was more curious?
Oh, as a campaigner, definitely. I mean, I guess I always get inspired by campaigns which are taking on problems, injustices, because the way we've always get change in this country isn't by just hoping attitudes will change, just hoping people at the top will go, oh, you know what, maybe we should stop being so rubbish. You know, people have to fight, and often at great sacrifice and cost to themselves, and people often ridiculed and demonised when they take things on, but they're always vindicated by history. And I look at campaigns like that, like this, in the same sort of vein, standing on the shoulders of giants of other campaigners before who've taken on, particularly if I look at feminism and the LGBT movements, for example, how took on overwhelming odds and just in a few generations, the change is so dramatic. And obviously there's so far to go, which is why this campaign's here in the first place. But it's just when people say enough is enough, we're going to try and do something about this. I just find that incredibly inspiring, and that's why I think this is such an important campaign, and I think it's just so important, and I just wanted to do anything I could to support it.
It's a very exciting time indeed. So you have a new book out later this year called The Establishment and How They Get Away with It. So
what are they like?
What do you like? It's a very quick, snappy title, which is very good. I like it. So tell me, do you think, in your opinion, is the Sun an establishment which is promoting sexism through softcore porn?
Big time, yeah. I mean, look, the Sun are interesting because they always try and present themselves as anti-establishment, don't they? Which is hilarious, given they're run by a multi-billionaire media mogul. He's based in the US, the biggest newspaper in the country, obviously very politically influential and dominant. From the vote hacking scandal, their tentacles have been everywhere. So they are as establishment as they get, and they often like to think they call the shots. And it's kind of shocking. It's 2014, and the main newspaper in this country, on page 3, has women being objectified and degraded. It is ridiculous.
And it's often the largest female image in the whole paper as well, which is pretty shocking.
It's the defining image. And I think what obviously that does is, because they just think, oh, it's a bit of a laugh, and it's just presented as, we're being po-faced and boring, and just chill out, you miserable lefties. But I just think, in 2014, for women to be presented like this still is absurd, and it's dangerous because, and this is what I think is important, is there's a link between women being objectified and being treated as sex objects. And in Britain, if we look at the statistics, they're pretty scary still. 400,000 women sexually assaulted a year, 80,000 women raped. And then this broader continuum of sexual harassment in the streets, people being yelled at, as though they exist basically for the sexual gratification of men. And that's something I know from my friends and fellow activists. Not something I can ever know firsthand what that's like, but from their experiences and what they say can often be a very intimidating and frightening experience, and it's reinforced by something like Page 3, the main newspaper in the country. Presenting women in that way fuels that whole sense of women being sex objects, and I think it's dangerous. I mean, there's no getting around it. I think that's dangerous, and I think for an establishment newspaper to be peddling and treating women like this is bang out of order. We need to finally get rid of it.
It's a very good point, well made. And I want to read you one of your quotes, actually, which is that you once wrote that men must not remain silent while women continue to face sexist persecution. What would you say to anybody, and in particular men, who might not have considered the implications of Page 3 before?
Well, it's funny because there's this satirical news website which many of you will know called The Onion, and it had this headline: man takes over struggling feminist movement. And it's kind of important to avoid that, where men's voices basically can end up dominating a discussion which needs to be led by women above all else. But men, it's so important when men show their solidarity and support for women. Because not only because of the figures are just reeled off the fact that women face sexual harassment, rape, sexual assault, the way they're objectified and so on, and that should be a concern to everybody, and we should all speak out against it. But actually, for men, this sort of machismo is not good either. You know, and I'm not going to try and portray men as the real victims. Obviously, it's women who suffer because of the sort of sexist society we live in. But actually, this kind of general macho culture is bad for men, because men grow up, if they don't conform to the stereotype of being a man, in quotes, so this kind of unreconstructed version of being a man, being macho, being aggressive, getting in a fight, leering at women and being sexually aggressive and treating women like sex objects, then they're liable to be called, you know, stop being such a big woman, or stop being such a those sorts of things. And that's gender policing, and that's really bad for men because it stops men being themselves. But also, we know from the statistics about mental health that men are far less likely to come forward about mental health issues because they think it's unmanly, they think it's being like a woman, in quotes. And that's why the suicide rate is the biggest killer of young men. So it might sound like an odd case, but actually this sort of sexism, this rampant sexism, has an impact particularly on young men who feel trapped by this kind of form of masculinity. So actually taking on sexism it liberates women, and I think men should speak out in support of that, but also it will make it easier for men to be themselves and not feel they have to be this kind of, you know, very outdated version of being a kind of knuckle-dragging Neanderthal who's all like birds, beer, and, you know, that kind of old image. We've come a long way in the women's movement's changed men, and I think men have changed in that they're more likely to speak about their feelings, they're more likely to have female friends or gay friends, they're more likely to take a role in raising kids. You know, still a long way to go with all those sorts of issues. But women have changed men for the better. And I think this particular campaign links into all of that. It's about men and women standing together and actually making life better for both of them.
Absolutely, it definitely ripples out through a community into a larger society. You think it's quite a small thing, page 3 on a newspaper, but actually the repercussions of it are very much ongoing and a universal sort of issue.
It's the symbolism of it. You know, it's a symbolism of the fact we still live in a society where it is acceptable to objectify women in this way, and that has an attitude that does have an impact on the way men treat women, because it legitimises it. You know, if you think the main newspaper in the country has women being objectified like that, then that helps justify a whole range of other forms of behaviour, which mean that women are still treated as not equals, as there to exist for the objectification and the satisfy the sexual needs or whatever of men. And I think, you know, the symbolism is so good.
And for those who perhaps they do immediately disagree with page 3, but maybe don't know how to react about it, maybe they feel intimidated by it, or a pressure within their working group to say, wait, this is a little bit weird. What advice would you give them? Maybe on I don't know, I mean, this is very stereotypical, but on a building site or on, you know, in a sort of a schoolroom or a working men's club or something, if there's one guy who sat there and thinks, actually, I don't want to see my daughter or my young sister here portraying her breasts in a sexualised kind of way for anyone to see, what would you say to those people who are thinking of speaking up about it to their friends and groups?
Well, I think that's a really good point. You know, would many of those men, how would they feel if that was their daughter presented in that way? And how would that make them feel? And would they feel that is their daughter being objectified and degraded in some way? I think most people would think that. I think most men would think that. I don't think they'd be comfortable with it at all. And I think they should just think, well, if it's not good enough for my daughter, I think it should be good enough for anybody. Because when you think of it that way, you think, hang on, that is obviously a woman being objectified. And also, you know, do they want their daughter or their mom or their sister being leered at in the street or yelled at or being uncomfortable? I don't think so. And if they think, well, there's obviously a link between this sort of imagery and that sort of behaviour. So I think what they'd say is, look, this doesn't make me a man. This isn't manly in some way. This is just pretty tawdry stuff. For the main newspaper in the country to present women like this is, you know, it's pretty grim. In 2014, I think most people, if they think it through like that and they think about think all those things through. I think reasonably they go, would I prefer to live in a society where the main newspaper in the country is objectifying women in this way for the sexual, sexually objectified for men? I think they think, well, probably not actually. And do they think in 50 years' time they think that's still going to be going on? Well, probably. I think they realise it isn't because things are changing. So the question is, why don't we just, get to it now? Yeah, why just wait, and why not just get to it and treat all women as equals and stop this sort of degrading sort of behaviour? Absolutely,
that is what we're after. So as you guys know at home watching this, we've been working on a little poem. Everybody that I've had the pleasure of interviewing has added 2 lines, and it's getting a bit long now, as you can see on here, so we're going to share a couple of lines each. So I'm going to kick it off. This is how it's gone so far. On a partially cloudy day in 1970, the men at the Sun were wondering what to put on page 3.
We don't know the details, but we can assume that there weren't many women on the team in the room.
I've got an idea, said an old hack called Pete, as he stubbed out his fag and leapt to his feet.
To sell loads more paper, a surefire way is to show a young lass in her pants every day.
It started with side boob in soft black and white, then on to Lasardi all perky and tight. And now, Owen, your next 2 lines.
Look how many we're selling, or so said the editorial staff. That was always their mission, however degrading or crass.
Perfect 2 lines. Owen, thank you so much.
No
it's
worries.
been a pleasure.
Oh, it's great to see you.
And comment underneath, show us what you're thinking, give it a like, give it a share, and together, let's nip this in the bud.
Come on, support this campaign, everyone. We'll win.